Have you ever wondered how the Tibetan Buddhist tradition incorporates a non-dual perspective? Today we'll be investigating the differences between Vajrayana, the Tibetan path of using visualization and devotion to bring about spiritual transformation, and the more direct approaches of Dzogchen and Mahamudra, which emphasize recognizing the inherent wakefulness of our own minds. How do these two different approaches work together in an integrated non-dual path to spiritual awakening, combining both direct and progressive, sudden and gradual perspectives? And what's the importance for students and teachers of every tradition of exploring our unacknowledged shadow parts in order to avoid becoming arrogant and acting out unconscious patterns in the name of realization? Welcome to the Non-Dual Wisdom and the Pathless Path podcast. I'm your host, Stephan Bodian. I'm a spiritual teacher, a licensed psychotherapist, and the author of Meditation for Dummies, Wake Up Now, Beyond Mindfulness, and my new book, Infinite Awakening, A Guide to Non-Dual Wisdom and the Pathless Path. Today, I explore these and other questions in conversation with Lama Palden Drolma. Lama Palden is the founder and director of Sukha Siddhi Foundation, a Tibetan Buddhist center named after a revered woman teacher, where she trains and mentors students in the teachings and practices of the Kagyu tradition. Lama Palden worked for years as a licensed psychotherapist and now provides spiritual counseling at the intersection of spirituality and psychology. Her book, Love on Every Breath, offers instruction and commentary in the practice of Tonglen. Okay, greetings, Palden, Lama Palden. So great to have you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And I wanted to begin by just talking a little about how we know one another, because we've known one another now for almost 30 years, I believe. We met through some mutual friends. And then at a certain point, I became quite interested in Mahamudra. I had studied Dzogchen with several Tibetan teachers, and I studied with you. And we also did some diamond heart work, which you also lead or have led, and really got a lot out of that. And we've been friends ever since, which has really been a wonderful connection, certainly for me. And so I wanted to begin by talking about your early spiritual background. I mean, you're a Lama, after all, which means you went a long way in your practice. You really committed yourself to your practice. You did a 3-year retreat. And most of us listening in won't have done anything like that at all, and we'll be quite curious on what led you into doing that. This is called the Non-Dual Wisdom and the Pathless Path podcast. And I would say yours was an example of what I would call a pathless path. In other words, you were drawn by your own intuition, what felt right for you, initially exploring different traditions and then landing on one and giving yourself wholeheartedly to it. So tell us some more. How did you end up where you are, and what was your path like until the point where you were totally committed to the Tibetan tradition?
Yes, I was praying to meet my teacher. I came to a point where I'd been doing Zazen. I was involved with Sufism, mystical Christianity, and since I was about 14, studying Gandhi and different traditions. And then I realized that I needed a teacher. And I had teachers, but it didn't feel like, my heart grew in a certain sense. So I was actually praying to Mary that I could meet my teacher. And not too long after, within a couple months, a Sufi friend dragged me off to meet very highly esteemed Tibetan Lama Kalu Rinpoche in San Francisco. And as soon as I saw him, right within a couple minutes, I knew this was my teacher. So I thought,
Wow.
well, he's Tibetan Buddhist. That's fine, whatever, because I know that's my teacher. And that's how I got
Whoever,
involved in
yeah, you fell in love, it sounds like, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Just instant recognition is more like it. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had that experience as well. It doesn't matter what tradition they're from. They're clearly the embodiment of what you're aspiring to realize for yourself. Yeah.
Yes. So then I had always wanted to do a retreat, and it turned out, I mean, I found this over the next few years. It turned out he was the preeminent 3-year retreat master among the Tibetans at that time. And so he was very interested in putting Westerners in 3-year retreat, and in fact started the first 3-year retreat for Westerners in France, which started in the late 70s when I was getting to know him. So then those two things came together, my wish to do long retreat and his making available these for Westerners. And so I entered retreat. Yeah. And when I was
So
30
that's an
years old.
aspiration you had, 30 years old. So it's an aspiration you had from very young, and sounds like it just took fruition in its own way, but through the connection with your teacher, huh? That powerful connection.
Right. Yeah. And good circumstances that allowed it to happen. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, so you spent 3 years on retreat. Where was this?
Salt Spring Island in British Columbia, on top of a mountain, on top of an island. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Uh-huh. And what was it about retreat that drew you? I mean, people who are listening, wonder how do you go from, finding this teacher and then really being committed to spending 3 years on your own, basically. I think there is some interaction with other retreat participants, but largely on your own.
Yeah, I had been really longing in my late teens for mystical union, whatever that meant, for divine union. It was a feeling in my heart, and I was really longing for that. And to me, that meant really deeply working on myself. I always had this strong feeling like I really had to work on myself. I worked on myself in my teens psychologically as well, but also spiritually, and in my early 20s. So I felt that doing spiritual practice was really important, and I was committed to that. So that's what really drew me to the long retreat, was this idea of really deeply working on myself and
Mm-hmm.
having the space
Giving yourself wholeheartedly, which, it's one thing to work on yourself and do, meditation every day and, go to an occasional one day retreat. But, 3-year retreat, that's quite a commitment. So I think very impressive and shows your deep devotion. Yeah, earlier you mentioned you prayed to Mary. So there are other influences going on there that were drawing you, but a deep commitment, union with the divine. Yeah.
Right. And as soon as I met Kalu Rinpoche, within 6 months, before 6 months was up, I had gone to Darjeeling, India to be with him and to study. So I had been studying in the Himalayas and also actually living in Bhutan before I went into 3-year retreat. So I had, been in Nondual, the preparation practices, and it was kind of a surprise when I actually just suddenly went into retreat, but it was a culmination of all these deep wishes.
I can imagine. Right. I imagine you could spend probably hours talking about your 3-year retreat, but briefly, what was it like? I mean, I know that's asking a lot, but how would you describe the experience, the impact it had on you?
Well, it took a few months for us all to really settle into it deeply, but I think of it as the hardest work that I ever did in my life, but by far and away the most rewarding. And I feel like what the energy and effort in my heart that I've put into the practice, especially during 3 retreat, but of course since then as well, whatever effort and devotion and heart opening and that I've put in has been repaid thousands fold.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
that's my general feeling about deep, long retreat. It's very hard work, but it just is so incredibly, it just pays off so amazingly.
Mhm. Transformative fundamentally, huh?
Hugely transformative. And I really did feel at the end of it, um, that I had come into divine union, or however, that's much more of a theistic term than Buddhism would use. But that longing in my heart, what it felt like in my heart was that my heart had reconnected with itself.
Wow. Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Isn't that what we all long for? To connect with our heart in the most fundamental, essential way, huh?
Yeah. So the
So,
reconnection happened.
so yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, that's fine.
So, yeah, yeah. I'd like you, in particular, to talk to us about the non-dual traditions. This is non-dual wisdom and the pathless path. Many people may not know, but in the Tibetan tradition, there is what's called the Vajrayana, which is working with the energies and the deities and the many practices of visualizations that are transformative in a fundamental way and enlightening. And then there's the more non-dual traditions, really, although they often are merged together, which point directly to the nature of our fundamental being, nature of mind. So, can you talk a little bit about the non-dual traditions of Tibet, the Dzogchen and Mahamudra? Again, I studied Mahamudra with you, which was quite powerful and a beautiful complement to the Dzogchen I had worked on with other teachers like Sokni Rinpoche. How are they different? How are they the same? And how do they compare with the Vajrayana and intertwine with the Vajrayana?
Yeah. First of all, intertwining is the right way to look at it, because Vajrayana is done within a non-dual context. The whole of
Mm-hmm.
Vajrayana is done within a non-dual context, and it's done within resting in the nature of mind, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, the true nature, as much as one is able to and possible. And the Vajrayana really, in a lot of ways, clears away the obstacles and allows the transformation that allows one to rest in non-duality much more fully and completely, and totally,
Mm-hmm.
because it,
Mm-hmm.
it works on transforming limiting concepts and limiting habit patterns. And it gets into the essential identity of who we take ourselves to be. And it helps
Mm-hmm.
connect us with both Mahamudra and Dzogchen, as well as Vajrayana, all lead to connecting us with who we truly are. So in the
Mm-hmm.
tradition, they're very much intertwined. But then Mahamudra is, of course, in our lineage, in the Kagyu and Shampa lineages that I was trained primarily in. I had contact with all the lineages of Tibetan Buddhism and have teachers from all of them, but the primary is Kagyu and Shampa lineages. And in those, Mahamudra is taught and practiced. And from the Kagyu comes down from Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa, Gampopa
Great.
to the
These are great
Karmapa.
masters. These are great masters from India, actually, at first, and then early Tibet. Huh?
Right. And then with the Shampa, it came from two human women, Naguma and Sukha Siddhi, who were living in
Mm-hmm.
Kashmir, were from Kashmir. And then their disciple, Chumpa Naljar, brought it to Tibet. So the Shampa lineage came from those two women. So those two lineages, as well as having many Vajrayana practices, specialize in Mahamudra. And Mahamudra, like you were saying, is really a very profound path for helping people to recognize fully and completely their true nature, the nature of mind, the nature of reality. And that's done through first really learning to focus the mind and abide in shamatha. Uh, and shamatha's end result is samadhi, but by
Can you
itself,
explain shamatha? Can you explain first shamatha for people?
sure,
Again, this is yeah, yeah.
yeah, sure, a Sanskrit term shamatha. Um, It really means calm abiding or concentration. And it's being able to focus and concentrate and rest in whatever you're resting in the meditation. So there's many, many kinds of shamatha, and in other kinds of meditation, then shamatha is important because it's the factor that provides the stability of mind in any meditation. So shamatha is developed for all of us through whatever meditative practices we do, in terms of being able to concentrate the mind. Ordinary people, through their studies or their work, also develop concentration. But in the case of spirituality, it's concentration on being able to place the mind in any particular way, in any particular kind of meditation, and have it stay there. So for Mahamudra,
go ahead.
yeah, for Mahamudra and Dzogchen.
These traditions have found that developing this quality of shamatha is really essential for allowing the mind to remain in one place and open to these qualities that it needs to realize. That without that, there isn't sufficient calm abiding to make those recognitions or realizations possible. So it's a preparatory practice, huh?
Right. And it also, one of the Dzogchen masters said, Dzogchen is 80% shamatha and 20% vipassana. So the vipassana aspect of it is the insight, but shamatha is always there helping us abide in non-duality, in awareness, emptiness, appearance, emptiness. So it's there all along the path. But anyway, so that's necessary to develop some kind of shamatha, and there's many ways to do that, and it's really can be up to the preference of the individual in terms of Mahamudra, how you develop the shamatha. And Mahamudra teachers are skilled in teaching to help people develop shamatha. And then once there's some capacity in shamatha, then one directs the mind in Mahamudra into inquiries where you're inquiring not from the conceptual mind, but from awareness itself. So awareness itself does the inquiry, the looking practices, the gazing practices that through those very specific inquiries open up the possibility of realization, of the profound insight which leads to realization.
Can you give me an example of how that would work and an inquiry practice that would function in that way?
Yeah,
Because I know there are many, many different ones. Yeah.
First of all, there really needs to be, and this is one of the most profound thing, which also has very profound psychological implications as well, is that one needs to actually understand and be able to look with awareness, to rest consciousness or in awareness itself. So basically there's ego consciousness, conditioned consciousness, and then there's awareness itself. And of course, this is a process of being able to rest in awareness itself. But that through practice happens more and more where we're able to shift into resting in awareness itself. And then the inquiry, for example, would be, there's many different ones. In fact, it explores the totality of our experience and perceptions and conceptual mind, etc. But for example, inquiry into the self. Is there a self? And so looking directly with awareness at the experience of self, can one find an actual self?
Interesting, beautiful. And it also, I think what is really unique about it, maybe not unique, I'm not sure, but quite special about it is that it teaches you how to inquire. I think so many traditions, certainly nowadays with many teachers of non-dualism who don't have a tradition that they come to, they're kind of developing these on their own or perhaps from other teachers, but they don't have this specification that you're offering, that you need to first understand how the mind functions and rest in awareness itself, not come from the mind. And I find we're working with people that often they're, of course, inquiring from the mind, and the inquiry will be limited by the way they're asking the question.
Yeah, and by the consciousness they're asking the question from. So this is a crucial point of inquiring with awareness itself into one's own direct experience. So, and there's, like I said, many aspects of the inquiry so that it goes through everything that's in our normal human experience: thoughts, feelings, emotions, perceptions, the outer world, the inner world, eventually coming to
penetrates them. By goes through means they penetrate through.
Exactly. Penetrating.
There's a beautiful verse from Talopa Song to Naropa that I just love. Gazing with sheer awareness into sheer awareness, habitual abstract structures melt into the fruitful springtime of Buddhahood.
Yes, that's one of my favorite lines too. Yeah. So that's exactly right. The awareness can penetrate into our experience of phenomena and then come to understand, realize the true nature of phenomena, the true nature of self. Self is another phenomena. And the experience of self is an experience of phenomena. But what is the essence, as is, you were talking about, what is the essence that is always there, that is not changing? So Mahamudra and Dzogchen are the inquiry into true nature means what is the unchanging nature?
Beautiful,
so we know that phenomena changes constantly. And what is it that's there that is unchanging?
Beautiful. And that's what Advaita is looking at. That's what Zen is looking at, all pointing to the same place, but in very wonderful and beautiful and different ways. You mentioned in particular that the Mahamudra inquiry will help eliminate or remove the obstacles. So, for example, what obstacles does this inquiry remove?
Oh, well, actually, I was talking about Vajrayana really removing obstacles.
In general.
The Vajrayana practices really remove obstacles. From a Mahamudra perspective, I think it's really what I was talking about, that shift in consciousness into awareness itself from ego consciousness, that removes the obstacles that are blocking us from realization. Because in ego consciousness, we're hindered by conceptual consciousness. It is by definition conceptual. And the concepts get in the way.
Yeah.
And dualistic. Yeah. So it's the actual shifting out of conceptual mind that removes that obstacle so that we can directly inquire into the experience itself without concepts and see what is actually true.
Right. Beautiful. Yeah. I encourage people to consider that this is within their grasp. It may seem esoteric and obscure, but it's actually something that one can do with
exactly. Really good point. Thanks for mentioning that, Stephen, because Mahamudra is so explicit in its instruction that it's very, very helpful for many people. And it's really just developing the hang of so to speak, of resting awareness itself and inquiring with awareness itself. That's the fundamental shift that needs to happen.
I found it really invaluable. It really gave a real boost to my practice, after all those years of Zen and Advaita with Jean Klein. So I really recommend it to people. I mean, what do you think about the teachers who are offering Mahamudra and Dzogchen, training in these practices without requiring a Vajrayana background, without requiring years of Vajrayana practices, Nundro, the 100,000 prostrations and, mantra, recitations and et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that's, I think you do it to some degree. What are the limitations, shall we say, of doing it that way?
I think it can work, definitely. I think it's, you know, uh, a question of strengthening the shamatha enough. But I think that, as we know, realization is not enough. We need to be able to rest in that 24/7 and, to
Mm.
actually actualize it through all of our habitual patterns and emotions and all of that.
Yeah.
So, as I was saying, what Vajrayana helps with is loosening all the karmic patterns, purifying them, even on the subtle body level, clearing the channels and having the prana flow in a way that is conducive to realization. So one can definitely engage and have success, I believe, and I've seen it in the path of Mahamudra or Dzogchen without Vajrayana. But then, and anyway, one needs to be very careful with any kind of realization that it gets actualized in terms of what happens when I get angry. Am I able to rest in the true nature of the anger when I'm angry, or am I acting out that anger? So either way you go to within Tibetan Buddhism to come to realization, the critical point then is how that's actualized into moment to moment experience of being a human being. So our kleshas, our obscured emotional patterns are still going to come up. And in fact, within Vajrayana and Mahamudra and Dzogchen, we talk about the obscured emotions like jealousy, anger, etc., ignorance itself, as being the wisdoms in their untransformed form. So as those emotions are liberated, as we can rest in their true nature, they're liberated into different aspects of wisdom, different aspects of realization. But this is really a key factor. If we think we have realization, and maybe we do have some authentic realization, but we're still completely living within our conditioned habit patterns of ignorance and without, you know, the personality going through a transformational process, we're not going to get very far in the long run. So this has to happen whether you start with Vajrayana or not. Either way, that this process has to happen. The
Yeah.
realizations need deep integrating,
Yeah,
so
this
we
is
that
I really stress this in my teaching and also in my new book, Infinite Awakening. The importance of what I call embodiment. Integration would be another word, right? How to live from that moment to moment. Otherwise, what's the point? What's the value if it doesn't transpose into our everyday life? How we are with our loved ones, our friends, how we are in public in interrelationships with people. And I find that a lot of the new non-dual teachers and teachings that don't have this wisdom from a tradition, although I myself have combined different traditions, something can be lost in the process, And I've actually found, as we have noticed, that there are these teachers also within the tradition, outside of the tradition, who haven't fully realized it and integrated it in embodiment, who act in ways that are unskillful and do an injustice to the teachings that they are presenting to people. So I think this background work, this deeper cleansing and purification and releasing of core patterns is so important. And
yes.
Tibetan Buddhism has the skillful means, which I think is beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, it's surprising, like one may even be able to rest in the true nature of some very strong emotion at one point, and then maybe a few years down the road, some huge emotional turbulence happens, and all of a sudden one can be thrown completely and just acted out. When even after you've learned how to rest in the true nature of emotion. So, it's tricky. It requires, really awareness of ourself and what's going on. And, it's very
Right.
humbling. In actuality, the spiritual journey, if it's really progressing in a true way, is very humbling in the face of our own ignorance and obscuration
Beautiful.
and
I
working
totally
through them.
agree. In fact, I think the humbling might be the best part of it, the most important part of it, to see our limitations,
Yes.
and to then have to deal with them. I think there are a lot of teachers who want to rest in their realization, and there's so much emphasis these days on awakening, as if, one and done. I had this awakening and now I'm one enlightened person and I can go around teaching. It's one of the reasons I call the book Infinite Awakening. I think it's an endless process of awakening to deeper and deeper levels and releasing more and more of the patterns. It's a lifelong process, I believe. And
Right.
I think it's so important to acknowledge that and to be committed to that again and again, being humbling, and being humbled by it.
Right. I really agree. And I think there's something wrong if we're not humbled, because there's some sort of ego clinging that is remaining, and ego identity that's remaining, that's like a hard shell, and I think
Right.
that the path, whatever path we take, any authentic spiritual path, is going to lead us into humility. And,
Yeah. And maybe humiliation. That can be good news too,
times,
right? To be humble.
at times,
Yeah.
one of my teachers really emphasized learning to rest in the emptiness of embarrassment, the emptiness of the self who's embarrassed, the embarrassing thing itself,
Right.
and feeling any of that. So whether one is humiliated or embarrassed, or being able to rest in the emptiness of the self that would feel that, and the emptiness
Right.
of
Exactly.
the situation, into the true nature of it all being appearance emptiness,
Exactly.
awareness emptiness.
Trungpa, who I hung out with a bit, used to say, disappointment is really good news. you know, and, endlessly disappointed, right? How wonderful that we get to be disappointed, huh? So,
Well, I think
yeah, go ahead.
we're
You finish.
only disappointed when we have
That
expectations.
expectation, of course, of course. It keeps showing up, our expectations, right?
If we expect
So,
we're already enlightened, and we're
right,
we're not actually, then that's going to be,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I actually had a teacher who I invited on to be with me, and I said, really, I don't want to talk about the nature of mind or emptiness or awareness, consciousness. I want to talk about you. I want to talk about what's like. Where do you make mistakes? Where do you get lost? Where you get caught up in patterns? And how do you deal with that? And what's that like for you? He didn't want to go there. We didn't do the
Mm,
interview.
mm,
So,
mm,
I'm very interested in that. Let's talk about it, because I think as teachers, to acknowledge it and to share it, we don't have to, but I think it really helps people not to be so perfectionistic in their own practice, and to dedicate themselves to this process of
mhm,
embodying. Embodying.
mhm,
So,
mhm.
so it's often called shadow work, right? Working on the
Yes.
shadow, which literally means what's not in the light, what we're not aware of, to aspire to be aware of what we're not seeing, the patterns we're not seeing, and work on those, right? So
Mhm, mhm.
I'm interested in how you, as someone who is trained as a psychotherapist and has also studied not only Tibetan Buddhism, but the diamond approach originally formulated by Hamid Ali and Faisal. I don't can't pronounce his last
Mukadam,
name. Who I think,
Mukadam, yeah.
what is it? Okay, and
Mukadam.
that you Mukadam, and you studied with. So, tell me more about the diamond approach and the psychotherapy work you've done, and how that integrates with the Mahamudra that you teach, and
Yeah.
Vajrayana.
Well, the thing with Mahamudra, with Dzogchen inquiry, is that it's inquiring into the ultimate nature of reality, of mind. So, as I was saying, ultimate in that it's unchanging. What is the unchanging true nature of mind and reality? And with diamond approach, or diamond logos work, one can also, you can do ultimate level inquiry at a certain point with that work, or it can bleed into that just through the process. But you can also really inquire into the relative nature of things, into the phenomena itself, the chain of cause and effects that produce certain phenomena. So say, like, for example, say I find myself really angry or something. I can do, like, from a diamond approach kind of way, I can inquire into that anger, find out, where it's abiding in the body. How is it abiding in the body? What are the thoughts connected with it? What are the emotions connected with it? The sensations. So you can inquire into the phenomena itself to understand how the phenomena is arising. And what that approach does is it ultimately liberates those phenomena. And as you inquire into it, the phenomena, and that's where it bleeds out more into the ultimate. But the phenomena itself can liberate as you inquire into it through.
Could you explain a little more of that? It's a little abstract, probably for many people. So give an example of what that might be like, and how it's different to inquire into the phenomenal level, the experiential level, and then into the ultimate level.
Well, so say, for example, I would start with, if I'm inquiring on the level of phenomena, okay, this anger, what does it feel like? Is it all throughout my body? Is it in one place in my body? I could look at the thoughts that are fueling it. What thoughts are fueling it? And those are almost, pretty much always dualistic. In other words, somebody or something has made me mad, and there's a split right there between subject object into a duality. So it's seeing into that and then investigating the causes of, like, okay, well, how does that make me feel? And what are these thoughts doing that I'm feeding it with these thoughts that are making the anger stay there and be intense? And what if
Which is a standard practice in psychotherapy? I mean, that's sort of a basic psychotherapeutic technique. Yeah.
Yeah. And the inquiry itself into the phenomena on the intellectual level or conceptual level, the sensate level, the feeling level, the emotional level, all of these different systems, inquiring into how it's feeling, operating, what the thoughts are doing. That's like inquiring onto the relative level of things, the level of phenomena. And as I said, it can bleed into seeing the true nature of some of those. It may or may not go into that. But even if it doesn't go into the ultimate nature, the phenomena itself starts transforming. The anger itself starts transforming through that inquiry into something different. And so it could be, another example could be feeling a complete lack of confidence in oneself, feeling really sort of empty in a negative sense, in a psychological sense, feeling like there's just such a lack of confidence and in oneself. And one can inquire into all the felt sensations, the ideas of that. It's like following a path of breadcrumbs is what I often felt when I was doing a lot of that kind of work.
So you talked about the ultimate nature. The other side, the ultimate nature would be it's all empty.
Not all empty. No, it's empty appearance. It's appearance, emptiness, inseparable. Awareness, emptiness, inseparable.
There you go.
So it all boils down within Mahamudra and Dzogchen. It's not all just empty. There is emptiness, but there's awareness, that knowing quality itself. And there's always appearance. Phenomena is inseparable with emptiness.
This is what's called Rigpa, yes? So maybe talk a little bit more about Rigpa.
Yeah, Rigpa is a Dzogchen term. It means awareness, emptiness, resting in awareness, emptiness. In
awareness, emptiness, yeah.
Yeah, in Tibetan, for Mahamudra is called Talmulgi Shepa, which means resting in ordinary mind. And this is emphasizing, back to what you were saying, that this is actually very accessible for people if they set their mind to it. It's very accessible. It is ordinary mind itself, which is awakened mind.
Right, yeah, beautiful. Say that in Zen as well. Ordinary mind is the way, as the great Zen koan. So, yeah,
yes,
absolutely. So, this is very different, of course. There are a lot of non-dual teachers now who I really appreciate and resonate with, who would say there's nothing you need to do. There's nowhere you need to go. You don't have to do any practices. You don't have to investigate. You don't have to inquire. You don't have to transform. You don't have to liberate. It's all here right now, perfect as it is. All we need to do is just be it, be one with it, appreciate it, let everything be as it is in a very profound way. What would you say from the point of view of the tradition that you come from and what you teach?
I think that's absolutely true. And if one is able to do that, then excellent. But for
Right, right, right. Yeah, if you
most
can do it,
people
go
need
for it.
a
Right,
path, like you said, it's a pathless path because ultimately it's doesn't exist either. But in a relative sense, some instructions, some path really benefits a lot of people. It's not because what can happen is you can sit there and everything is primordial purity, primordial perfection. We are already all awakened, but we don't recognize that. But what can happen is if you just sit there and try to feel that or be that or know that, you can simply be resting in ignorance itself, because our
mm-hmm.
ignorance is so profound, it's so huge, it's so vast, it's so all encompassing that our consciousness is limited by it, by our ignorance.
Right,
And so we could just sit there, you know, um, even with really great teachers who are, deeply realized, somebody could be sitting there, with in traditions where there's no path or teachers that like to teach without any instructions or anything other than what you just mentioned. But people can sit at their feet for 30, 40 years and really still not have realization. So I think
right,
with Vajrayana, with Mahamudra and Dzogchen, there's certain um, methodology, um, you know, uh, and less with Dzogchen, but there still is methodology that really helps people to have realization, to cut through the methodology is to cut through the ignorance, basically.
right. Well, it's interesting. You kind of frame it as a war against ignorance. So there are those who would say, well, there is no ignorance. See, again, this is the absolute versus the relative
Right.
perspectives.
There is no, it's
Primordial.
absolutely true. Yeah. We are awakened and there is no ignorance, but as they say in the some of the sutras, it's like there in the Heart Sutra there's no ignorance and no ending of ignorance, but nevertheless people are suffering. Nevertheless
Right.
people are not realizing that they're awakened. They haven't realized that. So the question is how to realize that we are already awakened,
Uh,
that everything is
realize what's
primordial.
already realize what's already the case. If we don't realize it,
Exactly.
what good is it? It may be
Yeah.
in the Zen we have what's called the gateless gate. Realization, the way reality is to see that is just a gate away. All you have to do, but then how do you get out to the other side of the gate? And if you're not on the other side of the gate, then what good is it for you to know what's on the other side of the gate? You have to pass through, which essentially is to see there is no gate. But to really see that fully is realization. It's a powerful process to get to that point. You know,
Yeah.
I'm
And
thinking of this wonderful. Go ahead.
some people are sudden realizers, but there's not that many sudden
Right,
realizers in that, they can stumble across, what you articulated, about the pathless path very beautifully, um, in terms of it's all just present right now. You are awakened and just be that or whatever. But,
right, right,
but, um, the vast majority of people that I've seen are not sudden realizers.
right. Yeah,
And
in
that's
in the book, I
method.
also talk about that as well. Again, I'm in pointing to the direct approach. It can be direct, but then I think there are preparatory practices that can help you in that direct approach. And then once you realize, then that's in a certain way the awakening is the beginning of a whole path
Right.
of embodying and living from it. So people think
Exactly. It is the
awakening is
beginning.
the
Yeah.
end. It's actually the beginning.
Right.
Yeah,
I totally agree. It's the beginning of a much more profound, deeper process of fully awakening.
yeah. There's another beautiful phrase I love from Tilopa's song from Naropa. I don't know if I'll get it exactly right, but the sage of Mahamudra has no distractions because no war against distractions has ever been declared.
Exactly. Yeah.
You want to say a little more about that?
Well, it's resting in the true nature of distractions. And um, so it's saying that from the beginning, one is understanding the non-duality and of distractions and non-distraction. And to understand the non-duality, one understands the true nature. So the sage, there's already wisdom, understands there is actually no distractions. There's nothing
Just
truly
what is.
there. The distraction
Yeah.
isn't truly existing. So one can rest in the true nature of distraction, just like you can rest in the true nature of anything.
Because the notion of distraction is based on a duality between the one who's distracted and what's being distracting. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about non-duality for a minute. I think it's helpful for people to understand that we're talking about the collapse of subject-object split, the subject-object split, the perceiver and the perceived, the world and me. This is what we're talking about with duality. The world out there, and then there's me. That's a fundamental,
Split.
lack of truth, that there is a separation ultimately between the world and me, between the perceiver and the perceived. And so in some sense, the path is also taking responsibility for the totality of our experience and understanding the experience and the experiencer are not separate, are non-dual.
Beautiful.
And in realizing the true nature of self, the true nature of reality, one sees there is no separation. There's no separation in reality. There's no,
Beautiful.
So one goes beyond that separation of that split in terms of non-duality, and that's where, we see the pathless path too, that the path itself doesn't truly exist. Nevertheless, food doesn't truly exist either, but we eat food as human beings in general. Most of us need to eat food. Most of us need to eat food and sleep.
Right.
And
exactly.
This is part of relative truth of being a human being. Most people need to, eat and sleep. Now, for yogis that are in caves for many years, they can get by on little or no sleep and little or no food, for quite long periods of time. But that's a state of deep concentration, deep samadhi, and deep insight, that allows that to happen. But for most of us, we're very much living in a relative reality of needing food. And so, we can understand the true nature of the food and the one who's eating it, but we're still engaged in that process. So I think, it's really, that's another very humbling factor, that as human beings, we're quite at the mercy of phenomena, and that can be transcended, but that's a very high state of realization, and
Right. I think that's a really profound point. I think to me, that's one of the greatest mysteries of the spiritual life, is the relationship between the absolute and the relative. I think, how does the absolute manifest in the relative world? How do we not get identified with the relative and at the same time live in the world of relativity, because we are human beings? Unless, again, we're in the monastery or in the mountaintop in a cave somewhere, we're interrelating. People see us as a person. We're relating as a person in personal ways, and yet not to be caught up in that and identify with that in a dualistic way is one of the great questions of integration and embodiment, I think, that we're faced with, I would say, moment after moment.
Totally. I totally agree. And the Bodhisattva path is always talking about skillful means with the relative, and even the Buddha, died, and passed away. I mean, even a Buddha can be poisoned and die and pass away. It's like, that's the relative reality truth, that as human beings, we are going to pass away, and that this body is impermanent. And I mean, that's the whole point really of realizing, which is the unchanging truth of reality, the true nature of mind, is that we can go through the death process and still be resting in true nature through the whole process.
Right, letting go of the form body, letting go of the mind and body that we take to be who I am, and yet remaining true to our undying, eternal, true nature. Yeah,
Yeah, right, right.
beautiful. Yeah, good. Anything more you want to share, Paulin? Beautiful talk. I think it's a wonderful
Well, I
conversation we've
think,
had.
yeah, it's a delightful conversation. I think to say a little bit more about what you were just bringing up, I think it's both a challenge and a delightful play of the interface of relative and absolute truth. And, relative is truth too, phenomena is truth too, but it's all due to cause and condition. And how can we be skillful with that? How can we really interact with phenomena
Right,
in a way that is um, where our love is freed, so to speak? We haven't talked about love, but love is so important in this whole process of, the interaction with all that is. And I think, the in Dzogchen it said the two wings of the bird are wisdom and compassion, or we could say wisdom and love, and that both are needed on the path. And the the interplay and of absolute and relative in our situation in this is the spontaneous dance of this is so delightful. It's just so completely amazing and delightful. And I think that opening our hearts more and more and more on this process, I don't think it's just realization of the ultimate, but I think opening our hearts, learning to be embodiments of love,
beautiful.
learning or allowing ourselves to be full embodiments of love. And that was what really struck me with all of my uh, great teachers in the Tibetan tradition. Was not only was there this presence that was always resting in true nature, the ultimate realization was always a felt presence in them moment to moment when I was around them. I never didn't feel that in their presence. But there was a tremendous amount of love that was emanating from these
Right,
people. I think that union is just the incredible beauty and the actual potential for all human beings. And, this is even in a small way, if each of us can just start the morning off by wishing well for all sentient beings, having loving kindness for ourselves, wishing well for ourselves, wishing well for all sentient beings, having loving kindness for all sentient beings. If each of us on this planet did that every single morning, things would change. Maybe
right.
we possibly live in harmony. Maybe we could possibly live without war, and just from a simple act of placing our minds toward wishing all beings benefit, and of course, including our own.
Yeah,
So I think this is another part of the path, the opening of the heart, which is, incredibly important, which is why, you know, um, I've just written one book. Of course, many of my friends, including you, have written many books, but why I focused it on the extraordinary Tonglen, the opening of the heart practice, because I found that to be, equally valuable and important. And it's interesting, but the Tonglen that, uh, the one practice I wrote about in Love on Every Breath, it's from the wisdom Dakini Naguma, who is fully and completely awakened in this life. And it really helps people in that practice not only profoundly open our hearts and become embodiments of love, but also really, really helps people get in touch on the spot with their awakened nature, which is really interesting. It's another path to actually feel the awakened nature within oneself, which is what the Vajrayana really helps us do when we're meditating on awakened beings. always that awakened being dissolves into ourself, and we feel the non-duality of that awakened being
Right.
and
Right.
ourself. And that helps us to actually really touch into and feel in a very powerful way our own awakened nature. So those
Yeah,
two are
beautiful.
very supportive.
I'm glad we ended, or we're not quite ended yet, but I'm glad we've come back to love. I think ultimately, to me, it all resolves in love. And love bridges all the so-called dualities and so-called gaps. And I think that is our essential nature. As Nisargadatta said, love tells me I'm everything, wisdom tells me I'm nothing. Flip sides of the same coin. And between these two, my life dances, I like to think, and and that to me has also been the fruition of my own path. Well, my path is not over, but the endless, opening and infinite awakenings have more and more come back to love. It's really all about love of reality for itself, you could say. It's the way I like to
Right.
say it most
Yeah.
fundamentally. That's the dance, reality loving itself. Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah,
And that's a delightful play. And
yeah.
we get to be here with other human beings, which is such a delight.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, even the notion you think of the bodhisattva, the bodhisattva, I think that there's possibility to go into a realization that's beyond manifestation. But then, as a bodhisattva, you vow to, there are no sentient beings separate from who I am, and yet you vow to liberate them. What does that mean? If there are no, it's a kind of paradox in a way. But sentient beings of my own heart, I vow to liberate them, you know. So yeah, thanks so
Yeah,
much, Paul. Been beautiful.
paradox is, I think you can't really have realization without understanding
Without
paradox.
paradox.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Totally.
Paradox is what
Paradox is
helps
in
break through
nature.
conceptual mind. Yeah.
I totally agree. Well, I think we could have another conversation. Maybe we will and continue. This has been beautiful. So thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. I really
Thank you so
appreciate it.
much. And really, thank you
Awesome.
for inviting me. Thank you for having me
Yeah, my
together here with
pleasure.
you today. And I
My
really
pleasure.
enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah, great. Okay. Namaste. Take care. Bye-bye.
Namaste.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Non-Dual Wisdom and the Pathless Path. Join me periodically for wide-ranging explorations of spiritual awakening and the nature of reality, incorporating the non-dual wisdom of Advaita, Zen, Dzogchen, Shiva Tantra, and beyond. My guests include teachers in these traditions, as well as scholars, therapists, artists, activists, and others who incorporate a non-dual perspective into their work. I'm particularly interested in honoring both Shakti, the dynamic, provocative, unpredictable energy of becoming, and Shiva, the pristine, unchanging, silent ground of being, as equal partners in the dance of non-dual reality. Thanks also to Deva Parimal and Mitten for their interpretation of the classic Sikh mantra Ad Gurai, offering reverence to the spiritual wisdom of the ages. Used with permission. Until next time. Sri Guru Dev